She said they were trying to hurt her. She said she had no choice. She said it was self-defense. 7 men, dead, dumped on Florida highways. Between 1989 and 1990, bodies kept showing up, shot multiple times, wallets missing, clothes torn, cars abandoned. And no one suspected the woman, because no one ever does. But when the truth surfaced, when the trail led back to a blonde hitchhiker named Aileen Wuornos, America didn't ask why she killed. It asked how she got away with it for so long. Some called her a monster, others a broken mirror held up to a society that never saw her coming. This isn't just a story about murder, it's about rage, about survival, about what happens when pain goes ignored for too long. And for Aileen Wuornos, the question was never if she'd snap, it was when. Long before Aileen Wuornos made headlines, she was a girl without a home, without safety, without trust. Her life began not in violence, but in absence. Born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Aileen's early years were marked by instability. Her father was not present. He had already been convicted of serious crimes. Her mother left when Aileen was just a toddler. By age 4, she and her brother were placed in the care of their grandparents. What should have been a second chance wasn't. Her grandfather was strict and home life was cold. Aileen grew up feeling like an outsider in her own family. She struggled in school, fell behind, and by the time she was a teenager, she was already drifting, living outside, trying to survive on her own. She was just 15 when she was told to leave the house for good. No support, no guidance. She set up camp in the woods behind her school. It wasn't adventure, it was survival. From there, life moved fast and never upward. She found herself tangled in minor crimes, loitering, theft, public disturbances. Her name was on more police reports than job applications. In 1976, something unusual happened. At just 20 years old, she married a much older man, a yacht club president. But the marriage didn't last. Just a few weeks later, it ended abruptly, and Aileen was back on the road. The pattern continued. State to state, city to city, she'd hitch rides, take odd jobs, or spend nights in shelters, and to make ends meet, she turned to prostitution. But then came 1986. She met someone. Tyria Moore, quiet, soft-spoken, a hotel maid. Aileen saw in her something rare, connection. They moved in together, and for a while, it gave her hope. Aileen began referring to Tyria as her partner. She worked to provide, mainly by walking the highways and picking up clients. It was dangerous, but it paid the bills. The relationship brought Aileen something she'd always craved, a sense of family, of being seen. But her pain, the trauma from her past, it hadn't gone away. It lingered under the surface, unspoken, unhealed. And by the end of 1989, something began to shift again. The roads were colder, the nights longer, the jobs more dangerous. And in one encounter, one that turned tense, Aileen made a decision she couldn't undo. She pulled a trigger. And in that moment, the story truly began. It was November 30th, 1989, Florida. A cold, overcast morning, and Aileen Wuornos was on the road again. She had been hitchhiking near Daytona Beach, trying to pick up a client. A man in a Cadillac pulled over. His name was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner, divorced, a man with his own past. They made a deal. She got in. What happened over the next few hours would never be fully agreed upon. According to Aileen, something went wrong. She claimed he grew threatening, that he frightened her, that she acted in self-defense. But what is certain is that Richard Mallory was shot 4 times. His body was found days later in a wooded area near Interstate 95. His car, abandoned. His belongings, scattered. The authorities didn't connect the dots at first. They saw it as a tragic, isolated case. Florida had its share of roadside crimes. Another robbery gone wrong. Another case with no leads. But for Aileen, something had changed. She returned home to Tyria, said very little, but the cash was enough to cover rent, to buy food, to keep them both afloat. Weeks passed, then came another man, and another. Each time the story repeated. She'd go out at night, come home with a few $100s, but no one ever asked where it came from. The pattern was forming, but only one person could see it clearly, Aileen. And while she would later claim they all tried to hurt her, that every encounter was self-defense, the truth was harder to untangle. What was clear, though, was that these men didn't return home, and their names would begin to pile up. David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Burris, Dick Humphreys, Walter Gino Antonio, Peter Seams, all found shot, all discovered off highways, rural roads, in ditches, in forests, all with one common thread. They had picked up a woman on the roadside. But the police didn't yet know her name. They didn't even know they were chasing the same person. Until they found the car. Peter Seams' vehicle had been abandoned, wiped down, but not well. A palm print was lifted. It belonged to someone already in the system. Someone who'd been arrested for theft, for assault, for carrying weapons. Aileen Carol Wuornos. By mid-1990, law enforcement had a string of unsolved murders, different counties, different jurisdictions, but the victims all shared something. They were older men, travelling alone, found shot and discarded off Florida roads. Aileen Wuornos wasn't on anyone's radar yet, but she was slipping. She was leaving behind evidence, fingerprints, palm prints, clothing, and then surveillance footage. At one gas station, two women were seen ditching a car, Peter Seams' car. A clerk remembered them and gave a description. A composite sketch was released to the media, and almost immediately, someone recognised her, a former friend, a former client, someone who knew Lee. The police had a name. Now they needed a way in. But finding Aileen wasn't difficult. She had a pattern, frequenting cheap motels and biker bars around Daytona Beach. She drifted but rarely disappeared. On January 9th, 1991, Aileen was arrested at the Last Resort bar. Not for murder, yet. It was an outstanding warrant for an old weapons charge. She didn't run, didn't resist. She was calm, quiet, but under the surface, something had shifted. Meanwhile, the police turned their attention to Tyria Moore, Aileen's partner. Tyria wasn't charged, she wasn't held. Instead, they gave her a phone and a wire. Over several days, they had Tyria call Aileen from out of state, pleading, begging her to confess, to protect her. Aileen didn't fold immediately, but slowly. The walls closed in. On January 16th, 1991, inside a small interrogation room, Aileen Wuornos spoke. "I did it," she said, "but they tried to hurt me. Every one of them." To the police, it was a confession. To Aileen, it was something else entirely, a justification, a final claim of survival. She believed, or wanted to believe, that she had done what she had to do. But the state of Florida saw something else, and they were preparing to prove it in court. The courtroom wasn't just a place for justice, it became a stage. January 1992, Aileen Wuornos stood trial for the murder of Richard Mallory, just one of 7 victims, but the prosecution only needed one to seek the death penalty. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, onlookers, legal experts. Not all of them came for justice. Some came for spectacle, the female serial killer, a label that sold papers and drew headlines. Aileen sat in silence, hair pulled back, face expressionless. Her defense? She claimed self-defense. She said Richard Mallory had assaulted her, that she feared for her life, that she reacted the only way she knew how, by fighting back. But Mallory's past wasn't allowed in the courtroom. The jury never heard that he had once served time for attempted sexual assault. To the court, he was a victim. And Aileen, a cold-blooded killer. The verdict came quickly, guilty, and then, not long after, death. But that wasn't the end. Over the next year, Wuornos faced 6 more trials. She pled guilty to each one. No more defences, no more explanations. Some called it acceptance, others saw it as exhaustion. Each plea was met with the same result: another death sentence. Again and again. Outside the courtroom, her story exploded. TV networks aired specials, tabloids ran interviews, documentary filmmakers lined up for access. But behind the headlines was a woman unravelling. Each time she appeared in court, she seemed more distant, paranoid, angry, accusing the guards, lashing out at the press. She said she was being poisoned in prison, said people were using her for money, said the world just wanted her dead and done. Maybe she wasn't wrong. But the truth was hard to untangle. From trauma, from untreated mental illness, and from a life that never gave her a fighting chance. As her appeals wore down, and the death chamber crept closer, Aileen Wuornos became less of a person in the public eye, and more of a symbol, of rage, of violence, of controversy. But the real story was still unfolding. October 9th, 2002, Florida State Prison. Aileen Wuornos woke up early. It was her last sunrise. She declined her final meal, no feast, no spectacle, just a cup of coffee. At 9:47 a.m., the curtain rose on the witness room. Journalists, legal observers, victim families, everyone watching. She was strapped to the gurney, white sheet, IV lines. When asked for last words, she said, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." It didn't make much sense, at least not to the outside world, but in her own mind, perhaps it did. At 9:47 a.m., she was injected with a lethal dose of chemicals. Aileen Wuornos was pronounced dead. The news broke across the country. Television anchors recapped the timeline, true crime specials followed, and the debate reignited. Was she a cold-blooded serial killer, or a product of trauma, shaped by years of abandonment, violence, and desperation? Some called her a monster. Others saw her as a mirror, reflecting the darkest parts of society back at itself. Over the years, books were written, films made. The 2003 movie Monster, starring Charlize Theron, won an Academy Award. But even that portrayal sparked new arguments. Was it too sympathetic? Too polished? Because the real Aileen Wuornos wasn't glamorous. She was rough, unstable, complicated. A woman who didn't just fall through the cracks. She was never given solid ground to stand on. By the time she was 13, she'd been sexually abused, homeless, and alone. By the time she was 18, she was selling sex to survive. By the time she was 33, she'd killed 7 men, and whether you believe her claims of self-defense or not. There's one thing that remains true. No one is born like this. People are shaped, scarred, pushed. Aileen Wuornos wasn't just a killer. She was a warning of what happens when you leave people behind, ignore their pain, and expect them to find peace in a world that gave them none. After her execution, the world didn't forget Aileen Wuornos. In many ways, the obsession only grew. Not because she was the first female serial killer. That title alone is misleading. There had been others. It was because she didn't fit the mold. She wasn't seductive. She wasn't cold and calculating. She wasn't easy to categorize. She was angry, emotional, unstable, and terrifying because she felt real psychologists dissected her interviews, her confessions, her breakdowns on camera. And what they saw was something more than just criminal pathology. They saw a woman pushed past her breaking point. Diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, marked by emotional volatility, impulsive decisions, and a desperate fear of abandonment. But even that diagnosis only scratched the surface, because the trauma came first. The kind that fractures a child's sense of safety, and then later makes it impossible to trust anything. Not people, not institutions, not even yourself. Some criminal profilers pointed to hypervigilance, a state of mind where everything feels like a threat, where violence becomes the only perceived way to survive. To her, every man who picked her up could be the one to hurt her, or maybe remind her of the ones who already had. And when you're living in survival mode, morality becomes blurry. Right and wrong collapse under the weight of fear, but the public didn't just want a clinical explanation. They wanted something else, a villain, or a victim. Something simple, something clean. Aileen Wuornos was neither. She spoke in contradictions, one day saying she acted in self-defense, the next declaring she'd kill again. She lashed out in court, then cried on camera. She was at times charismatic, at other times chilling, and the media fed on that duality. They made her a symbol of female rage, of mental illness, of a failed system. But symbolism has its limits, and Aileen Wuornos was still a person, flawed, damaged, but undeniably human. And maybe that's why we can't look away. Because her story isn't about what she became. It's about what was allowed to happen to her over decades. It's about what goes unseen until it's too late. So on October 9th, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her final words were strange, unsettling, but they captured the chaos that had always lived just beneath her surface. "I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus on the 4th of July. Some called her evil, others called her a product of her circumstances. But the truth? The truth is uncomfortable. Because Aileen's story isn't neat, it doesn't offer closure. She wasn't innocent, but she wasn't created in a vacuum either. She was abused as a child, thrown out as a teenager, criminalized as a woman, ignored as a human being. She lived in alleys, survived by selling herself, and trusted almost no one. And every time she tried to stand, life knocked her back down. When she killed, she crossed a line. There's no excusing that. But when we talk about monsters, sometimes the real horror isn't just what they do. It's what we let happen to them before they ever got there. Aileen Wuornos was failed by her family, by the system, by the silence. And in that silence, she unraveled. Today, people still debate her story. True crime documentaries, podcasts, films. Some see a dangerous killer, others see a broken soul. Maybe she was both. But if there's anything to learn from her life, it's that monsters aren't always born. Sometimes they're made, and sometimes we make them.